just give a quick introduction, maybe a little bit of context about why you think you might be sitting in this seat.
My name is Nunery. I am at the heart sort of an entrepreneur, technologist. I was chatting with Calvin about some large language model stuff a couple months ago, and I think that's why I'm sitting in the seat. But
you happen to be in range.
Yeah, I think so. No, but I love talking about AI. I love thinking about it. I love finding people I can do that with that are not my wife because she can't stand it. So, I'm an entrepreneur right now. I'm working on a medical coding software business that uses large language models at the heart of it. So, looking forward to talking about that.
Awesome, Jordan.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jordan Thayer, so that might have something to do with it. I finished my PhD in 2012 in combinatoric optimization, which is this tiny, narrowly defined subfield of AI. Come ask me about it and you'll regret it, but I'll really enjoy the conversation. These days, I'm the AI strategist for SEP. We're a software product consultancy here in the area. So I talk to people in a lot of different domains about what their problems are, help them identify the types of AI that can solve those problems, and what it would take to field those and where it might go wrong. So I have a lot of conversations of that nature with folks, and that's probably another reason I'm up here.
Yeah, thank you. And Glenn.
My name's Glenn Franxman. I'm a developer at 6 Feet Up, so I work with Calvin. The reason I think I'm here is because I'm a bit of a stunt programmer. So I'll take on anything and try to find a way, and have been doing that for years. So I think that's probably why.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. Troy.
Troy Kelley. I'm one of the founders here at E-gineering, also developer for over 30 years now. Java has really paid the bills for me, but I love Python. I've done plenty of Raspberry Pi goofing around projects. I've had more exposure over the last 6 months as I've taken a bit of a deep dive into the AI space. And Python has been my friend as I have been exploring that. So really enjoyed that. I'm going to learn things because I'm the least experienced probably with Python up here tonight, but I'll do my best to answer some questions. EG is a custom software development shop. We do web applications, mobile applications, enterprise integration, data work, that sort of thing. We'll be 24 this year, so I'm over twice as old as our company. But yeah, glad to be here.
Cool. All right, I think a lot of people, when you hear the word AI, think of many different realms of things, but the hot one right now obviously is large language models and generative AI. So I'm going to focus a couple questions for sure in that direction, and we'll kick it off with that right now. It feels like there are a lot of possible LLM projects, large language model projects that are happening maybe at the kind of internal skunkworks level, but maybe not at a full production level. We've seen some big players in the market, like Google, roll out generative AI into some of the search results and then quickly walk that back. So what I want to ask was, we don't really appear to be ready yet to truly leverage these tools. What key changes need to occur for these tools to be reliably deployed into production? So I don't know who wants to take this one first. All right, Jordan.
So I'm not sure if it's the tooling itself that's problematic. You have a mic, right? They heard that?
Oh yeah.
Okay, great.
Yes.
I think it's how we think about programs, right? Most of the time when you write code and it does the thing, and it does the thing all the time, and the tests go green and you're golden. Most AI approaches are probabilistic in some sense. They'll produce a randomish output every time. We're not accustomed to writing code in that way. In the same way where multi-threaded became a thing and then we all took our foot off with async await. I think we're experiencing a very similar moment with that, except that the results that come back from the function aren't always deterministic, and we're not quite sure how to deal with that from a best practices perspective.
There's actually kind of more along the lines of like safety in the AIs themselves. I think a lot of times they're being rolled back because they're saying really unexpected things. Like it's not even just like the fact it's undeterministic, that they're just blatantly sometimes malicious
right? Like you're probably thinking of, well, if you're depressed, go to the Golden Gate Bridge and some of those very like awful things. I think if you're surprised by that, you're not paying attention or you haven't worked with the tools deeply, right? They can produce anything that's been on the internet, and the internet is a mini splendored thing.
True. Anyone else want to comment on what we need to be ready for this productionizing of large language models?
So along the
And
same,
hold that up to your close, there you go.
Here we are. So along the same kind of thing, the thing that I'm most interested in right now in trying to figure out is guardrails for the AI, because as she said, you can't trust these things. The answers are in an authoritative tone and extremely plausible and hard to keep on track. And all of that kind of thing, especially once you start adding tools, making tools available to your LLMs, your control over what's going on becomes really important.
What comes to mind for me on this is there's sort of two levels to this. One is the AI model itself, the Google and the OpenAI that are producing that. And then I think more also on a layer on top of that, which is the use within the enterprise, because there are some hilarious stories of this stuff going wrong in the enterprise as well. And I think corporate America, like last year was sort of the year of POC, and then this year some of those projects have been rolled out, and then quickly rolled back. Notably was Air Canada sold a flight for $1 because someone got it, intentionally got it out of, jailbroke the model and got it to sell a flight for $1. So shame on Air Canada for plugging their transactional system into a large language model. So I guess in that is like the enterprise corporations need to understand how things can go off the rails, and they need to put those guardrails programmatically or just not plug it into some tools. Another example was, no, actually, I mixed that up. I think it was Air Canada.
It was a bereavement policy on Air
Yes,
Canada.
that's it. So there was someone who was flying home for a funeral, and he was chatting with the model, and the model said, go ahead and book your flight. You can submit a claim later, and you'll get like a $600 refund. That was not true at all. And so they had to honor that. And then it was a car from Chevy, some Chevy dealership sold a car for $1.
Yeah.
So just crazy stories. So I think a lot of it is education of corporations, and then also putting mad disclaimers on these things.
I think a thing that I didn't hit on earlier, but that made me think of it is who is the model facing, right? Because the public has a vested interest in like, it's not antagonistic, but it is from an economic sense, right? They want the thing from the company at the lowest price. Your internal workers aren't in that antagonistic setting. Your internal workers, you expect them to also be experts in the particular domain. They can recognize the thing that's off the rails. So there's also, maybe it's not necessarily that the technology isn't ready for prime time. The technology isn't ready for full automation, but as a decision support tool, as something with a human in the loop, aiding an expert advisor, they can be incredibly effective there. You have all of the known problems with like automation fatigue and whatnot, but those are things where we have UX techniques to help.
Correct. So I was going to ask next on the same like line of thinking, the single large language model answering these questions in probabilistic ways are giving back potentially misleading answers. What are the thoughts on many smaller models acting in concert? I don't know if anyone's put thought that I know Glenn has.
I'm obviously a fan of that particular approach.
Maybe you can describe a bit of the approach so that folks can understand what we're talking about.
I started earlier talking about this, but so for a particular project, we had a number of steps in the chain, and latency is the biggest issue. So you had that as issue number one. Issue number two was the code was trying to do all of it in one program, which is, it just got to the point where the people who were working on that project couldn't roll out new features reliably in any period of time. So what we did was separate all of the actions that were going on, the things that were tools to an LLM, to separate LLMs, which we kept running independently of each other. Instead of the user interacting directly with the LLM, we put a message queue in the middle to handle broadcast. So that message queue acted as an actual chat server between these various LLMs on the back end. So the effect was that of a user was in a channel talking to an LLM, but that LLM was also in another back channel. And in that back channel, several other LLMs are monitoring the main conversation and basically whispering things into the ear of the main LLM so they can continue talking, authoritatively on what's going on with the right kind of attitude and things of that nature. And that's really the basis of it. And so far it works really well. Doing so means that those other things are spooled up independently, so there's way fewer, a lot less latency than you would get if you're using something like LangChain to try to pull this off. And also so one of the things that happens is an LLM kind of changes the way it responds to things with just even spelling changes, like everything about a prompt has an impact on its actual behavior. So if you're trying to add all your guardrails and protections in the prompt, you're actually putting the rest of the behavior at risk. So this allows us to also have those additional processes with their own guardrails, independent of the actual persona that user might be interacting with.
Yeah, it's really cool. So yeah, go ahead.
Just to layer on top of that, with trying not to repeat any of those great ideas there, is that I think we could also look for models to become more specialized in their training. And so you could very well have a model that is a off the rails cop, so to speak, right? Like it is trained to look for responses that are inconsistent with the behavior that you want. So I think in general, we're already starting to see this. I know that, for example, you mentioned medical coding. Like Microsoft has a cloud-based offering that does some healthcare related, and so I think we'll continue to see more highly specialized models, because the popular ones that are out there, like GPT, they're trained on basically the entire internet. And so you get all the good and bad that comes along with that. But yeah, and then there's the only other thing I would add that we're seeing improvements in sort of the cooperative agent space. And so while you didn't specifically maybe mention that, like it's similar to what you're putting, Crew AI, AutoGen from Microsoft, where you can set these agents up with specific roles. And I think that the evolution that we'll see there is, over time, a lot of performance improvements where you can have sort of like this parallel processing where possible to sort of check these things and still get good response time and better, be more confident in the results that you can push.
So I think in general, you're right. The more narrowly you can define an agent, the more likely you are to have success with that agent, because it's easier to know what success is on the target and get it right or wrong. I find it very interesting. What you're describing is incredibly similar to Blackboard systems and expert systems that were all the rage in the 90s, right? Having specific agents that were competent in a narrowly defined area, all working on a shared representation in memory. and noticing that there was a problem for them and working on it a little bit and passing it off for the next person, someone coming in and checking the work and rejecting things that are false. And LLMs are great in that they allow us to do that with way less engineering effort than we would have needed to build these systems from scratch 10, 15 years ago. But also, when people talk about validating the output of an LLM for factual correctness, they're almost always talking about it in the sense of, well, I'm going to bring in a second LLM to do that. Well, I mean, a probabilistic database won at Jeopardy, right? We could use that technology. We could use an OpenCV-based vision system. We don't have to use an LLM-based vision system. So there are really great opportunities to use sort of mixed ensembles in these spaces. And in general, ensembles are much, much more powerful than any of their individual components.
I agree. We just mentioned a major library player right now in the space, which is LangChain. I think Google's talking about LangChain constantly, almost like as they own it, but I don't think they do. That library has changed over the last 18 months tremendously, and I know we all have had a love-hate relationship with it, and I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads. First, what was important about LangChain in the beginning, and why did we start using it? And then I want to hear second afterwards. We'll go back through and ask maybe why you're not using it right now.
Does everybody know what LangChain is? Any hands for someone who doesn't know what it is?
Yeah, go give a quick
Okay.
quick overview of LangChain.
Okay. It's a really hard thing to describe, actually. Maybe if somebody has a better. I mean, it's a library for orchestrating LLM calls, and with it you can string together advanced use cases. Like the example that they give is, who is Harry Styles' girlfriend, her age raised to the 0.3 power. So obviously a useless, case in and of itself, but what it illustrates is the need for this language model to reach out to Google, to reach out to a calculator, to decide when it needs to do that. And so that was illustrative of some of the value of this thing. I admit I was a little bit of a kid in a candy store with that, and I was just like, oh, this is so cool, it must be valuable. And so I jumped on it in pre 0.1 version. And I was telling Calvin recently, just pulled it out because I really realized unless you want to hand over the flow of your process to the agent itself, it really just abstracts things and obfuscates things away too much. And small things like for such a long time, the verbose turning off the log wasn't working. And so I missed I would have been so much more effective programming my domain model, but it was just overwhelmed by these massive LangChain logs that I couldn't turn off. And eventually I just tore it out and went bare bones, just did fetch requests, HTTP fetch requests directly to OpenAI and some other things. But yeah, those are my experiences.
Glenn, if you want to go next.
Yeah, all the same. Was very painful. The pre 0.1, basically the 0.0.n releases were coming out every 2 to 3 days. They were updating their documentation, maybe with 3 or 5 days of lag, and only keeping, I think it was at the most 12 of the last versions of docs online. So anything you wrote last month was already, you couldn't find the docs on whatever the heck it was you were doing at the time. It was very chaotic. That and getting it, at the time I was using it a lot with index or llama index. And the combination had requirements that only occasionally you could get to line up. It was very painful. With the 1.0 or the 0.1, things definitely got more stable, which is very happy. Actually, everything seemed to get more stable once they got more stable. So I don't know if they had kind of a calming influence on everybody, but it definitely has been better since that time.
Yeah, similar experiences. I thought it was very effective. I actually, because it was a mechanism for me to learn kind of how to interact with the LLMs and some different patterns like retrieval augmented generation, RAG type stuff, where you, if you're not familiar with that, where you a lot of times use like a similarity search from a database to pull in context into a conversation. So say you have a Python book that is in PDF format, you break that book up into chunks, put it in a vector database, and then you can, if you ask about, tell me about Python classes, or something like that, it'll pull the relevant contextual information into the conversation. And LangChain was very approachable. We did some workshops on this for people, as well as after I learned it, I was like, well, let's give people some idea about how to build applications using LLMs. And it was a good teaching tool. We also experienced the volatility where we had to go through, and we're doing a workshop next week, and now everything is broken because we changed, one thing over here, version upgrade or whatever. But for learning purposes, learning how to manage like memory in a chat conversation, to use a vector database, to look at the low-level output that you're getting, the responses from the LLMs, to see what that looks like, as well as like the metadata that comes back along with the response, tokens used, those types of things. It served that purpose well.
I will say also, so early on, the kind of the value proposition, LangChain, was that it was going to give you all these abstractions over the underlying processes, but which was great for like the trivial, like, oh, look, you can have an LLM going in 15 lines of code maybe. But the moment you started caring about the retrieval process, for instance, things like that, you had to start tearing it apart. I don't know if it's still quite that way, because I've long since torn everything apart. And so these days, and also like its other abstractions over maybe the model in particular, it's all moot at this point. You can pull off a lot of what it was doing using something like Olama, so that you can like plug in local LLMs instead of over the net, or you can bring in like light LLM also to help plug in just other models that don't behave exactly like OpenAI's. But in the end, OpenAI's have always ended up being the best model anyway. So I'm kind of leaning toward not needing many abstractions at all.
Yeah, so it sounds like LangChain really was not a library as much as it was a framework for all these things.
It's a framework that was trying to be way more helpful than anybody actually needed.
So you end up fighting it more often than not. So if we're not using LangChain, and which LangChain's a great place to start. I think you all have mentioned that you gained a lot of ground quickly in learning how to interoperate with these large language models by using LangChain. What are libraries that are indispensable in your day-to-day usage right now of these tools, or the large language models, or the APIs, or the embeddings, or the various things that are available via the APIs? Are we back to just using requests library or HTTPX? And
Well, Dave did on the Good Tech Fest.
Good Tech Fest,
demo.
yeah.
He ripped it out, and that made me, so that was a code base that I had started using LangChain, and he found it too confusing and just ripped it out entirely and replaced it with request library, just making requests straight up. And I looked at that and was like, facepalm, this, duh. It made me reevaluate my use of LangChain at all.
So are there some other libraries that are useful in the space?
Well, so other things that I find useful.
Oh, and speak a little closer.
Even closer?
There you go. Yep.
Wow. Okay. I hate hearing my voice.
Well, we love hearing it.
Yeah. So, like things, I wouldn't call it a library, but like PG Vector allows you to store your vectors in a Postgres database, which allows your metadata around the things that you're embedding to go you can change that stuff transparently and create much more interesting retrieval strategies around the things that you've embedded. And that's probably about my favorite right now in general. Just doing that rather than re-indexing thing. Also, you can store multiple. You can just do so much more with it because you have the full power of Postgres than what you can do with something like Chroma or Face or Weaviate even.
All right, who else has got a favorite library or tool they want to share right now?
Yeah, I would just second the vector database for similarity search. I mean, that's really paired so closely with these language models. It's sort of like Docker and Kubernetes kind of paired together. So I think doing RAG is almost essential for so many use cases, and vector databases and cosine similarity searches are the best way for getting good results on that. I would be curious, I'm hitting some scalability issues with PG Vector, and I'm curious on the panel if anybody's got experience with performance optimization on those things. No, haven't got it. I mean, so just
Anybody in the crowd, anybody in the audience got PG vector performance tuning?
you said Alloy DB on Google Cloud, someone suggested? Okay. I'll have to try that. Just for a sense of scale on this, I've got a data, like, doesn't seem that large to me. It's a table that's got maybe 170,000 records in it, and each row has an embedding that is like 3,000 or 3,027 or whatever. Somebody, Glenn probably knows what. Yeah, what? Yeah. So when you get an embedding, which is basically vectorizing your text, you can choose how long that is. The longer it is, theoretically, is the more accurate your matches will be, but it also costs more. So my database with no more than 200,000 rows, each row has a 3,000 number vector. Running cosine similarity against that takes probably like 12 seconds or something along those lines. So not great at this point.
Yeah, and for those of you who aren't familiar, when you hear RAG or this retrieval augmented generation, that is this technique where you're using a vector database to get these similarities and bring them back and put them into the context window that you're sending to your large language model API, like to get, I'm asking a question, but more than the question, there's going to be all the kind of prompt engineering bits that are wrapped around it, and then also here's some documents I'm going to throw along with it, and now give me some answers.
So one thing that's, I guess, important to know is that, like, first off, your embedding model doesn't have to match the model that you're using for the LLM when you're doing the retrieval phase. And PG Vector, because it's Postgres, will allow you to store multiple vectors for every chunk that you want to embed. So one of the things that you can do is use a very small, very fast embedding model to do your first pass at the similarity game. Run that very fast to get back your 20 or some odd matches that you might have, and then run those through the longer against the longer embedding.
So you're saying like a Hugging Face embedding can be mixed with like an OpenAI embedding?
I use local for the for the retrieval embeddings, like 3 small or something like that.
Yeah, make sure you grab the mic.
A vector is a vector, right? So it shouldn't matter. And if you have importance, if you care more about similarity on these features than similarity on those features, then that suggests a natural fragmentation of your representation space.
Interesting. Cool. So obviously we're all lovers of Python, and what has enabled Python to really become predominantly, or I guess so prevalent in this large language model and the AI space in general? I feel like there's a lot of libraries, a lot of support, a lot of ecosystem. Now, I may be biased because I don't participate in the other languages realms, but I feel like Python has a pretty strong foothold in this area. What has led Python to this spot, in your opinion?
Kick-ass foreign function interface and network effect. It's an interpreted language, which is always nice. A REPL is just a godsend when you're programming. And then you can write high-performance Python itself, but most of these libraries are in C or Fortran, and they scream. But C and Fortran are a pain to write. No one wants to do that. And you get the beauty of the high-level language that lets you be expressive with the speed of the low-level stuff for the parts of the code that really matter. And I think those are the two big things.
Okay, who else has got an opinion on this?
I think that's basically it. Python is, because of its just nature, is basically the language of research these days. They could totally have been building all these things and writing their papers in Java or Fortran or C++. God knows the underlying things actually are. But if you're doing research, you're trying to mash together all these different aspects. You don't want to spend all your time on tooling and compile chaining, all of that kind of stuff. You just want to sit down in a Jupyter notebook and see what you can do. That's
Troy, you got a comment, especially coming from the Java background.
Yeah, I would just say that, like, if you're experimenting with some of this stuff, this goes a little outside of the LLM realm, but where I started was I was wanted to build just like a classifier, and so there's a website out there. It's fast.ai, and there's a accompanying like O'Reilly book. All the code is in Python. And what they do is there's an excellent instructor YouTube videos that explain some of the deep learning concepts. And what they do is the fast AI libraries are in Python, and they offer a higher level abstraction with some good, like, opinionated defaults, so that you can learn about the concepts without having to get into the weeds, and which can be confusing and overwhelming. So I definitely would recommend that if you're looking into some general AI, programming. And there's I've asked about not just some machine learning things in my conversations with AI, and most of the time it responds with Python code, because it's been trained on countless repositories, and those are the most accessible. And in my sort of wanderings, as I've been using Python a little bit more to do some experimentation and whatnot, there are some really great libraries. I love the name too. Beautiful Soup is a fantastic library for scraping content off of the web, and some of the PDF libraries are phenomenal, better than some of the Java PDF libraries that are out there, for sure. So
That can stay in the room here, it's fine.
yeah, no, I love programming. I'm not partial to any particular one, and I think you can do amazing things with most languages. But it's just the resources that you have available to you, especially if you're in learning mode for that. And I'm sure there's plenty of production application as well. But it makes learning a lot of these concepts very approachable. And Jupyter notebooks are amazing. Documentation and code. They're just a great way to kind of approach these as well.
Interesting. So when people are talking about models, they'll hear the word training models or fine-tuning models, or we've talked about RAG already as kind of three potential approaches for getting your information that you care about as responses to prompts. Maybe each of you or one or two of you can talk about when is the right time to train a model, if ever, or fine-tune a model. I think there might be confusion. People aren't sure where those kind of natural breakpoints are for moving along that path. So if anyone want to kind of talk about that.
Yeah, I haven't found a use case for us, yet where fine tuning makes sense. The LLM's fine tuning is useful for baking information into the model, but largely what these models have learned is grammar. They understand how to talk. And so when it comes to trying to get your facts into the model's attention and not muddied with whatever it got off of Reddit or something, you end up leaning back toward RAG. It's been, I've had a couple of projects where I was like, oh, finally, I'm going to fine tune a model for this thing. But it actually ends up being RAG at the end.
When the fine tuning can be pretty expensive. Has anyone gone through a fine tuning process?
Not all the way.
Yeah. Troy,
So I could answer yes, but I did a few very simple use cases with OpenAI's fine tuning, which is you give it a data set, you give it a test data set, how many epochs you want to run, whatever, and you do that. But they recommend, and I've read many articles on this as well, that the use cases for fine tuning are pretty narrow, and I think my thought is that by extension, like training your own model from scratch is insanely computationally expensive. They are sucking the energy out of the power grid by training some of these super large models. It takes a lot of energy and compute power. So, and OpenAI, they will recommend the same, like their wording is like, we really recommend fine tuning as kind of a last resort, and you really should consider using the RAG approach and going from there.
I think we should all maybe be mindful occasionally of the fact that language in large language model needn't be English. It needn't be a spoken language. It can be time series data. So when you find yourself in some weird application that there's no generic commercial application of outside of your specific domain niche, that's probably when you find yourself in need of tuning your own or building your own model from scratch, because no one has, I don't know, turbine engine telemetry to predict from, or not enough people to make that be a model you can download off of Hugging Face. And like, yeah, generally speaking, it's wicked expensive, but you don't have to run a 10 billion parameter model, not for everything. So you can make it more commercially applicable. But at the point where you're saying, should I train my own model? You'll know at that juncture whether or not that's the position you find yourself in.
that makes sense. Each of you have mentioned, or some of you have mentioned performance issues, latency, scaling issues with the databases. Are we currently at a point where the bottleneck is hardware or the bottleneck is software? Which one has to catch up? This wasn't on the list, so. So what does that mean to you?
Scaling up is just very expensive. If your use case actually gets, takes off, you might find yourself spending like 60 cents on a question if you're making enough LLM calls behind the scenes, or using these other APIs like that. I don't know if OpenAI stuff will maybe put some downward pressure on that, but like the cost for commercial text to speech and speech to text is not insignificant.
I would just say I think it's a combination of the two. If with the recent release of GPT-4o, they have the cost and the performance. I can no longer read at the speed that the content is generated, and so I don't think that they went out and bought and are running this on a bunch of. It's probably a combination, right? Maybe some better hardware or whatever, but I'm sure that they've also made some optimizations in how the software performance of the model to get those kinds of performance increases and things like that. So, yeah, I think it's a combination of those things. And to me, it's very difficult to understand the level of quality difference that you get with different quantizations of the models. You go from the different floating point lengths that are used in some of these, as well as the number of parameters. I'm reaching the edge of my knowledge here, but it's very difficult to discern. And there's a million benchmarks out there you can go look at, right? But to actually understand and get a really good feel for the quality difference with those is, to me, a huge challenge.
On the quantization, I think largely, like the performance changes are probably negligible. But what does change is the amount of RAM you need to throw at the problem, which allows you to use more, cheaper cards and whatnot. You don't have to go to like an H100 or something.
I think the answer is largely software is what will have to change. The recent advances in caching strategies have been very, very impressive and very promising. But there's a sort of a fundamental limitation to how many mathematical operations you can do in a square inch of silicon.
I haven't really done anything on my own hardware, so I can't really, I've just leveraged the large language model services that are out there. But I would say like some of our pain points are reproducibility and reliability on some of these things. So seeing some progress in the software on that front, even when you pass it a seed, even when you turn the temperature down to 0, we still get different answers. Like, so we spend a lot of time revising prompts to give us the thing that we expect in a certain scenario. And we run those unit tests and things turn green, which also costs you money. Like we're not used to unit tests really costing significant money, but we're up to like $1.20 per run of like some of our stuff. We have so many prompts. So it's significant. And 2 weeks later, we get different results on the same medical records. So that's been the biggest frustration, wrestling with these models. My business partner says, so she writes all the prompts, and I do a lot of the technical implementation because she's a medical domain expert. And she's like, Kyler, I think I inadvertently got married to ChatGPT. And I was like, why is that? And he's like, because he used to listen to everything I say, and now he won't. Now he tells me how things should be done. So it's like, okay, great. So she wrestles with GPT, and it's a painful process at this point, but still we're willing to put that work in because we're really like riding the edge of this innovation. And when it comes to medical coding, it's a domain that was unsolvable before. Like, it's just not possible to do with classification, neural networks plus business logic. Like, so, we're riding the front, and every time there's a new model that comes out, we're the first to check it out, first to adopt it. I will say, progress is not always a straight line on this stuff. Like we have found, we had to build in the functionality in our system to peg certain prompts to older models. Like GPT-4 0613 was behaving better for this particular kind of question, even after it had been superseded by newer models. And so, it's a really tricky dance with the devil sometimes working with these models. Mm-hmm. So I just hope progress on those fronts.
Yeah. Is anyone self-hosting models for any projects? Like, what are some of the gotchas that people should be aware of if they're going to self-host their own model, as opposed to using OpenAI's APIs or Bar or Gemini or whatever?
Right. To be clear, it's one that we've got from Hugging Face that we're hosting internally. I think the biggest hurdle has been, so we do it because of IP concerns. We don't have control over what OpenAI trains on, but we're going to generate code that's going to go in client products. We'd like to make sure that we know it's not, LGPL code, for example. So the biggest gotcha for us has been, well, I work for a tech company. Everyone's used GitHub Copilot. Our off-the-shelf LLM hosted on the hardware that we could buy off of eBay doesn't have the performance of GitHub Copilot. Isn't to say it's awful or anything, it gets the job done. But when it makes a mistake, people are like, well, GitHub Copilot would have never done that. That's been the largest hurdle, is expectation management.
So we've I think it was back in October, I went over to Micro Center and built a PC so I could run Olama on it. And it's sitting in front of my desk upstairs. So we've done a little bit of experiment that way. Olama, though, if you're not familiar with that, Olama is a kind of a model runner, essentially. And it does things like mimic the OpenAI API so that you can make calls with like LangChain or just the REST API that OpenAI has to these different models. It's a great project. I think one of the gentlemen that's one of the leads, Mark, he has a YouTube channel, Technovangelist, I think is his handle, somewhere out there in social media. Anyways, he has some great content. For our workshops, for example, we use RunPod, which is a way to just go out and get cloud GPUs and run that way. It's a great way to, if you start to do some cost modeling on what it takes to run a GPU, it can get pretty expensive that way, but you have maybe solved some of the issues with like privacy or whatever. And, I was gonna say something about Olama. It was only recently that they actually made it able to service multiple requests in parallel for multiple models. It was single threaded. And so one of the things that we started looking into was alternative plugins to Copilot. There's one called Twinny out there, Twinny, I think, that has a very Copilot-like experience, but it allows you to plug into a variety of models so that if you want to use something that you're hosting on a machine in front of your desk or RunPod or some other more secure environment, you can do that.
Okay, so Microsoft and Apple have both had recent events where they've announced their AI PCs or their AI now enabled features in the upcoming versions of iOS and macOS. What's got you excited there? What's real and what is hype, you think, on those announcements? Microsoft was going to take screenshots periodically throughout the day of everything going on your screen so they could answer questions back to you. How do you feel about this?
Yeah, I don't trust them. The recall thing is, I don't know what that is. I think they're just trying to convince people to normalize that in some way, and I think it's bad. That said, at the same time, I do run a project on my machine called MyWare, which keeps track of all the things I do, like every YouTube video I like, or things that I email to myself, or basically my browser history and things like that, and then turns that into an index that I can query against anything I put in, like Obsidian and whatnot. Say that? So why do you trust that? Because it's running on my machine. It's all, no, because I wrote it on my machine, I guess. So the software has gone through a self-audit, I guess. I know what's going on with that software, and I know what the risks are, and I know that I know that it's unique to me, so it's not likely to be like a target that anybody's going to get to. It's very different to impose rules on yourself than to have them imposed by somebody else, and I definitely bristle against anything from Microsoft. On the Apple side, the AI stuff was pretty exciting, and you can imagine how they did it. It all just makes sense. But because of Apple's history with Siri, I'll believe it when I actually see it and get my own grubby hands on it.
Jordan.
I'm baffled at the technical decision to use screenshots. You have the entire, the OS hooks that the user called. Why would you use a screen? Yeah. It just doesn't make sense.
That's where Apple seems to be getting it right. It's like, we know everything that's going on inside this computer.
Right, you would use the whole call graph, right? That's what you should be doing. So that makes more sense that Apple does it that way.
Yeah. Anyone else got reactions to the recent announcements of the AI computer? I think they're just trying to sell more computers. Microsoft, or the PC market, has been predominantly Intel and not a lot of GPU or ARM. So I think they were behind and need to sell some ARM chips now.
I think we're going to get an entirely new class of memes as a result of this. Like some of the thing, like a technology like this, there were, when the LLMs first came out, there were all kinds of articles of just conversations gone wrong, and operating systems offer, and whether it's on your phone or your desktop, offer so many different variables. I think it's going to be a little bit of a wild ride, and people are going to really poke and prod, and we're going to see some interesting and probably some things that are a little disturbing as a result of that as well. Yeah. And some cool stuff too.
Yeah, well, it sounds like a lot of this is trying to do it on device. Like if you have a M4 Mac, a lot of this should happen without it going out to the interwebs to make it happen. But I'd love to hear reactions to the announcement where Apple says some bits may go to their secure computing cloud to do some of the inference. They claim that it's third-party privacy auditable, and they're going to be using secure enclaves. I may be a hardware geek when it comes to stuff, but I've not seen anyone successfully implement a secure hardware enclave scheme at this scale. Do you think it's possible? Apple's announced things before and they never happened. So this could, I'm not sure if this is one of them.
Yeah, it literally sounded like they have clusters of twin phones out there that they'll just load your stuff on and run it there in their description. I don't know how
Apple Silicon servers, I think is what they say.
Right.
Yeah.
that have all the same hardware, and they're basically going to do things on your behalf using your configuration and your data. That part is kind of spooky, but I don't know. I like Apple, so I'm hopeful that they pull it off.
Oh, I am too. I would agree. Jordan.
In general, if two devices ever compute on top of the same silicon, then there's a chance for information bleed. So if they have truly a one-to-one replication, then technically it's possible. And if they don't have that, then technically jailbreaking the information is possible.
Yeah.
But it's all security, right? What's good enough? What's sufficiently secure? How much does the information on my phone really matter?
Well, I guess it matters. It's your information.
Right.
So that brings up an interesting point around AI and ethics. What do you think the responsibilities of OpenAI and other AI API providers are when it comes to the ethics and the usage of your data?
Oh man, I feel like the barn doors open, the horse is way down the road at this juncture, right? Like if you see people glibly refer to the last large tech innovations as illegal taxis, illegal hotels, and the plagiarism machine. But that's tongue in cheek, right? But it's not wrong either. Those companies,
absolutely how they started. I mean,
yeah, exactly. Those companies are not in a number of lawsuits over the improper use of intellectual property for no reason. So I don't think they have any moral authority to make that argument or to participate in the conversation at this juncture, but also I don't think a lot's going to happen to them either. Hopeful message for the children.
I would just say, there's the one example, right, where the New York Times went after OpenAI, and now there's a deal.
Yeah.
To use their data, so rather than there being consequences maybe for doing that, there's a financial transaction that takes place, and so I think there will likely be more of that.
Yeah, I would agree as well. Actually, any questions from in the audience or online? Laura, do we have anybody who's thrown some questions in the chat?
We sure do. We have two questions, actually. One is, what is your opinion on Rustification of Python?
I'm not totally sure what that means. If that means a re-implementation of Python in Rust. I've got no qualms about that. It's very performant. It's much safer. So if Python wanted to move away from, the C implementation being the canonical to a Rust implementation, I don't think that would be bad, as long as they didn't lose their bindings to all the C stuff.
Which is the magic, right?
I mean, you can always rewrite that stuff. As long, like, I work in Python, so I don't have to care about memory. I want the memory to be managed for me. If I want to do memory management, I want to do it in a language like Rust. So I think for most users, it won't matter, frankly.
I think it's been a good thing. I'll kind of throw my opinion on that one. Is that I think the move to like rewrite cryptography in Rust was a good move. I think the fact that WebAssembly has become a thing, and I think we'll see more of that in the future. It's still early, very early days on that, and having these kind of Rust hooks available, like enable more of that in the Python community. So Python is kind of not quite future-proofing, but getting ready for the future of like a WebAssembly world where you deploy to who knows what kind of places and what kind of environments. You don't have to care about that. That's some of my thoughts on that. So, Kylie, any comments on Rustification?
I don't know enough about the details. I'm in favor of WebRTC as sort of the great convergence layer. I did a project with some Microsoft web front end that was written in C# and compiles down to WebRTC, or not WebRTC.
WASM.
Yes, WASM, thank you. That's where my brain was. You asked about earlier, you asked about AI ethics, and I think that's a huge topic that's like worthy of a whole discussion unto itself. But, I'm most concerned about a lot of the deep fakes that you see online. Like that's really, where does the responsibility lie for companies that produce that technology? Are they liable for such things? Are they not? It's probably every week I see a video on YouTube with like Elon Musk wanting to thank me with Bitcoin for being such a loyal Tesla supporter. So it's that's what comes to mind on the AI front, and it'll be interesting to see where that goes the more technology advances.
I would agree. Laura, what was the second question?
What value do you see with expanding context windows?
I actually discovered just a couple days ago that a GPT-4o, so they say it has 128,000 token window, which is large and great, and but little known fact, the token window of the generation actually shrunk in GPT-4o. So it's now 4,000 tokens instead of a previous model had 8,000 tokens. So what that means is you can pass it a bunch of text like RAG information, but what it sends back to you is actually got smaller, which was a problem for us in our use case. But some of these models that have like a 1 million, 2 million token window, it definitely opens up a lot more use cases. It opens up things where it can know a lot more about you specifically instead of just relying on its world knowledge, general things. So I think that's really exciting. I could see a future where it is tracking, similar to what Glenn is talking about, but instead it's tracking all of the things you say over the course of the year and who you talk to. And then all of that goes into one large token window, and it can tell you things on like how to, it could be a counselor. It could give you advice on how to interact with people differently, so just really fascinating things that have yet to be seen.
So I think in general, the size of token windows in LLMs are, the knob there is human engineering effort versus computer computational effort, because in some sense we could boil down all of the features of every conversation you had into a year, given a domain, into the relevant feature set, and it would be very, very short. But if we have a billion tokens, well, I don't have to do the work, and that's really nice. So I think that there are certain applications where that distillation is impossible. They don't compress for whatever reason, right? But I think what they largely buy you is less engineering effort in setting up a sequence of queries and passing the relevant context across the threshold.
Well, so for me, the added context is a welcome thing. I'm not using 4.0 for a lot of the things that I normally do just to get the 8K token limit, which is often not enough because I use the LLMs for almost everything these days. Like very much the first draft of every commit message is an LLM call. Using a get hook, same for merge summaries. Those are also created with an LLM, and then I just edit them on the fly before they're posted. Things like my time entries, I just record chicken scratch, like a couple words, client meeting, things like that, and I let the LLM expand that into full sentences and whatnot. But the downside is occasionally I'll like you're doing a merge or something like that, and it's reapplying all of your commits onto another branch. And one of my commit messages will be token limit of 1,192 exceeded, blah, blah, blah. And right, then I have to get in there and do like a commit amend or something and try to correct it.
I would just add that there are some research papers out there. I haven't seen a lot of empirical like test data, but there are some papers out there that suggest that a larger context window is not always better, that there's a tendency maybe for models to kind of forget things that are in the middle. And so while those may seem very attractive, like, oh, I can stuff an entire book, in this context window rather than having to do RAG or something like that, depending on your use case. But I think it's not yet really proven and maybe reliable how well that expansion is working out yet.
Cool. Any questions in the room?
Well, real quick, also the added tokens that you're doing there slow things down and cost more. We did an experiment with one of our clients where basically we were feeding in this guy's autobiography so that you could chat with him about his life kind of offline, and tried the larger thing. One is the tendency for it to ignore bits in the middle was an issue, but also just the time, the latency on calls where you're passing like entire books. You have to embed that, and you have to pass that. So it's not like a simple, like you just use it because it's bigger.
Yeah, we're going from like web optimization of like making images smaller now to LLM optimization of making the prompts smaller and more specific.
Right.
All right, in the room, maybe got questions? Don't be bashful. I got some big brains up here. They're ready to answer. Come on up to the mic right here. Yep.
There is going to be a day soon where there are more prompt engineers than software engineers.
That's a good question.
If so, why? If so, why not? If not, why not?
Honestly, I kind of hope not. The models should be getting smarter and better at following directions, et cetera. A lot of what prompt engineering is just reminds me of like the old CSS hacks and things like that. If the LLMs are getting any good, then you'll just tell it what you want and it'll do the thing. You won't have to go through those kind of optimizations. It's a short-term problem that their job is to overcome.
Any other views on that?
I would just say that there are a lot of people out there right now that are creating working software that is not production software that is actually going to generate more work for people who know how to write good production code because it's going to work. Like one of the early conversations that I had was generate me some, database access code, and it was the perfect SQL injection code out there, but it worked, right? So, there are a lot of people that are unaware that things can be incorrect if it compiles and it works for a certain subset of test cases, right? We also, as developers, we think about corner cases, right? People that are out there generating things that are working are probably not thinking about corner cases. Reality will hit at some point when it's time to put code in production, and then that's where we're going to have to get involved, right? So I think that there is significant momentum in that direction that is actually helping create and sustain work that we'll be involved with.
Yeah, tech debt's going to tech debt.
So I think 20, 25 years ago, if you were a web developer, you were something real special, and it was a very narrow set of capabilities you had. And a decade ago, if you were a cloud developer, that was real special, and it was a very narrow set of capabilities you had, and people hired you specifically for that. And these days, you're expected to develop web apps. You're expected to know how to interact with the cloud. I think this will follow a similar trajectory.
Awesome. There was another question. Come on up here to the mic, please.
So my question is kind of similar to what he just asked. So I'm in school right now, and I can tell you curriculums are like easily 2 or 3 years behind on the whole AI LLM thing. And I know you guys mentioned tools like LangChain and PG Vector. What kind of tools do you think are important for students and young professionals to know before they get into the industry with working with AI and LLMs?
Git and VS Code. But like I say glibly, but legitimately none of them are important. So how to work on a team, how to communicate the idea that you're in the middle of, how to do testing and debugging, how to glad hand at a networking event like we're going to have after this is over. Those are the critical skills. Any particular library is not going to survive you paying any attention to it in most cases. Your ability to pick up the library, that's the critical skill.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I like to regularly work with some people that I really enjoy mentoring, and there's a few people that are thinking about developing some skills in the area of software development, or just people that are a little bit more junior. And my sort of advice so far is that an AI co-pilot, if you will, I like to refer to them more as sidekicks, because co-pilots actually have a decent amount of training and they don't go off the rails like an LLM might. So you absolutely must have this in your tool belt. Like, I'm convinced of that. But while you're learning, it should be a tool to accelerate your learning. And one of the things that I always say is never, ever commit something you don't understand, right? So you can use the LLM to generate code, but you understand it. It's one of the great things about our profession, actually, is this was talked a little bit about earlier, as developers, especially those of us maybe that have been doing it for a while, we can instantly validate the output, right? We know when something is crazy. And so which is, I think, one of the primary use cases with businesses. If you can speed something up, but have an expert look at the thing and instantly validate it and go, I just saved a bunch of money doing all the stuff up to this, but that's right, and I can let it go out the door, that's great. Like, we're looking for use cases like that with our, clients. But using it as a tool to accelerate your learning, you write a set of code, you're just learning, and you've got 50 if statements in your code. It's a great opportunity to ask the LLM, how could I improve this code? And many times you will learn some very valuable practices. It also could be wrong, but it's a great way to learn different approaches to solve a particular problem, for example, and in different languages. Show me it in Python, show me it in Java, show me it in Rust, whatever.
Excellent. Any more questions from the audience? Come on, come on up here and ask those. And I'll wrap it up after these two questions with one final question to the panel. And
Great. You mentioned using, to write your Git commit messages. I'd just be curious to hear other use cases that you guys are working on that you use LLMs for. Any and all.
so current things you're playing with using LLMs for?
Current things we're playing with.
Yeah. Tell them about the one you're playing with.
So one of them, I saw the 4 Omni release videos and whatnot. And so I wanted to recreate that, which is not hard. It basically does what it says. But I, mash together Whisper and Omni.
Closer to your mouth.
Whisper and
There you
Omni and what have you. Sorry. I'm usually talking in my head and not talking on the outside. But one of the things that I did was take a couple of webcams and mount them, whatever it is, 7 centimeters or something like that, apart from each other, so I could pass stereoscopic images into 4Omni and ask it to basically describe the scene, because I realized what was going on in those demos is they're just adding to the chat history descriptions of individual frames that they're capturing at some interval. What's truly amazing is, so when I pass the stereoscopic images in, it does understand them. 4Omni's interpretation of imagery is spot on. It'll tell me, at one point it was reading the posters in handwriting on the whiteboard behind me on the wall for me. But I started asking it questions like holding up 2 pints of beer and asking it which one is closest to you. And it would tell me the one on the right. And then I asked it, I changed and asked it again. I said, the one on the right. And that's when I realized it was just bullshitting me. So that's because it's just using those descriptions. The first interesting thing that I noticed about that was that I'm sending it these images stitched together. So there's technically 2 me's and 4 pints of beer in the image. And it did not complain about that. At some point I asked it, what do you see? And then I was like, what do you really see? And it said, I see 2 images. So anyway, the thing that I'm trying to do now is use photogrammetry to turn those things into a model and see how well it will understand the actual 3D representation of the things that are in the picture, so that it can answer me questions like which one is closer and things of that nature.
So professionally, I mostly use it to get past the blank page problem on a blog post for passive marketing content. I hate all of the output that it gives me, but as soon as I see the thing I'm mad at, I know what I want to write. Yeah, right? It doesn't sound like me. I know what I sound like, and that's awful. Yeah, I agree. And then I read a lot to stay apprised of what's going on, and so I'm sure you get newsletters with, here's the important blog articles. Those snippets are not long enough to contain useful information, and so summarization is a great use case for that. Personally, it's almost all focused on tabletop RPGs, so RAG models to answer rules lawyering questions at the table, because I don't want to flip through to the index. And if you're like me, you may have experienced some trouble in getting 5 adults to a table at a regular interval. So building a fake DM out of it, doing question answering systems and things like that has been a lot of fun.
Cool. Troy, what you got?
Yeah, this is way more boring than this stuff that they described. I have thought many times about the RPG side of things. So a couple of things that we've done is we build a tool. So a lot of times when you're using Copilot, behind the scenes, what is happening is they're managing the context of the conversation. That's what's going on. They're telling the LLM this is a Python file. Like they're giving it all this context. So we basically wrote something that will scan a repository of code and know based on like the file extension what the language is, and then we started out just very simply saying rank this code in the areas of security, maintainability, other categories, and rank it on a scale of 1 to 5, and then also provide no more than 5 sentences to suggest how this code might improve or whatever. And so we want to expand that by using the RAG approach, which would be to pull in additional important pieces of information. Like there's something called the OWASP top 10, right? The security. So we might pull in richer security information to guide the model to provide more specific feedback on the code, as well as things like potentially like client internal standards and things like that. The other thing I would say is, going back to the uses, is it can be great for documentation and diagramming. So there's a tool out there called Mermaid.js. If you haven't checked it out, it's a great like JavaScript based diagramming tool. You can take a whiteboard picture, many other different pictorial representations or diagrams, and it knows the language of Mermaid.js and actually it does a really good job generating documentation. So for those of you that don't enjoy drawing diagrams or whatever, it can be really great for that.
Kyler.
In addition to using it for the day job, I'm tinkering with a couple projects that are fun. One is a prototype on something that we were calling Gramophone, which is like a play on words for an app that can speak to you as if it's your child, and for like a parent that has Alzheimer's or something, having a conversation with them, which also brings up some interesting ethics issues. But it's been fun to put together the prototype and string together Whisper and 11 Labs for the text-to-speech. If you haven't heard the 11 Lab stuff or trained it on your own voice, you really should do it. It is shocking how good it has become. It's terrifying, actually, yeah. And then the other thing is just, I just see opportunity. Like, I mentioned before, I'm the technologist entrepreneur, so I'm just seeing use cases all over the place, and I wish I could be a consultant to go see what all the company's problems are and solve them with these tools. But so the other little widget I'm working on is a Chrome extension for designing a color palette for your website. So it's really, I came across this idea because I was asking GPT. I had 12 colors in my palette and I wanted another 10, and so I just typed in the hex codes into GPT and said, give me complementary colors, and it did a fantastic job of that, but it gives it back to you, of course, in text, and that's not very convenient. So it seemed like a really good use case for what OpenAI is calling their like GPTs, like their app store, where it can interact with your own API, and so opens up a lot of use cases there.
Very cool. You have one last quick question before we wrap it up?
My question is, I'm also a student and I use ChatGPT to learn various different topics and domains. Is there a recommended methodology for using these LLM models to gain long-lasting learning? Because I've found that many times I'll ask a question and I'll recognize a prompt that I receive and understand everything that it's talking about. And then 1 to 2 weeks later, I'll forget the pattern and I'll realize I have to re-ask that exact same question to recreate the same solution that I had gotten 2 weeks prior.
Yeah, it's like my 16-year-old with autocorrect spell check. He will never learn how to spell because he just right clicks, looks at the answer, and then it doesn't stick in his brain. So I guess, techniques for learning are trying to engage with the material more, like using it. You have a command of something when you can teach it to someone else. So look for opportunities to where you can explain the concept to someone else, and that helps reinforce it.
This structure is a really interesting question. my mind went on this is one of the best ways to learn things is through spaced repetition. So it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the LLM, but you could write a wrapper around an LLM to store your questions and answers, so that if it encounters you asking a question sufficiently similar to a question you've asked before, it starts asking you questions instead of giving you the answer.
I love that idea.
My general response to that is write a lot of code.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think it's, there's a book that I read recently, Unleash Potential, that talks about a couple folks who were terrible at learning new languages until they just jumped in and into immersion. Mistakes all over the place. They said embarrassing things as they immerse themselves in these different language cultures, but now they can learn these things very rapidly, and they speak many languages fluently. And so I think it's very similar for software development, is get in and speak the language, make mistakes, and learn. And that's whether it's speaking a lot of words or writing a lot of code. That's a great way to do it. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you very much for the question. I got one last question for each of you to answer. What is your favorite resource that you use to learn about new AI material? A blog, podcast, a YouTube channel? We'll start down with Troy and we'll come back this way.
Yes.
I want them all to go home with some kind of a resource.
So there are some really amazing resources on the LangChain website, actually, and they don't all talk about LangChain specifically. So there's a couple of YouTubers that I've been watching. Matthew Bremen, I think. I can put maybe the links in the Slack channel.
That'd be perfect in Slack.
Yeah, Sam Witteveen is another one of the guys. There's a handful. YouTube is great, especially if you find an author that always shares their GitHub account or their like Colab, which is a way to do Jupyter notebooks out there, where you can get in and you can start playing with the concepts and things like that. It's a great way. Some of them do a really good job of reviewing new models when they come out and things like that, so you can kind of appreciate what their strengths and weaknesses are. For me, I would say actually, honestly, it's been predominantly YouTube.
Thanks, Troy. Glenn.
So I would like to, I guess, parrot that I'm not very good at names or faces on people. But in particular, I'm generally looking on YouTube for things that are just going to inspire me to look at things in a different way, or what the latest research is. So one of my favorites in that vein is called 2-minute papers. So if you're used to reading or trying to read and summarize some of the research that's out there, that guy does a wonderful job of that stuff and has like the best tagline of all. He ends every video saying, "What a time to be alive." And he's great.
True. Thanks, Glenn. Jordan.
So for introductory stuff and tapas style things, I like This Week in AI and TLDR AI, or This Week in ML it might be called. And then for deeper things, you could always set up an archive RSS feed, or you could read the proceedings from NeurIPS or the International Conference on Automated Planning and Scheduling, or a couple of like AAAI or JAIR journals. On Twitter, I like Subaras Saganpati, who is a planning AI researcher who writes a lot of popular AI pieces for the, I want to say it's the Washington Post.
Awesome. Thanks, Jordan. Kyler.
Wow, NeurIPS, an archive, that's
deep.
intense. Yeah, that's deep.
That's deep stuff.
That's beyond my level. Sam Witteveen, Fast AI, great stuff. I'd also throw in there, Andre Karpathy does a fantastic job of explaining this stuff. A guy, I don't know if he's still producing material, but back in like 2012 when convolutional neural networks were the craze. I got my druthers there with a guy named Brandon Rohrer, Rohrer. He's a former Facebook, I think, but just did a fantastic job of explaining like how these networks work without any sort of hardcore math, which really helped me at the time to understand these things.
Awesome. Go ahead.
Yeah, bonus. I forgot to plug Free Code Camp. So especially like I talk to people all the time that maybe they live outside the United States or whatever. Free, fantastic resource, and they have many courses that are hours and hours long that take you through several, not just LLM, but some machine learning use cases and things like that. It's a great resource, and they have a really amazing community of people around the world that are willing to jump in and help answer questions and things like that.
Awesome. I will also recommend Simon Willison's blog. He's one of the Django co-creators. He does interesting experiments with all these things and writes about it. He's the one who coined the term prompt injection. So fun person to follow along those lines as well. I want to thank our panel for being with us this evening. I think it's been an excellent conversation, so let's give them a big round of applause.